everybody, and welcome to Mahamudra for the people. It's a real pleasure to be here with everybody, and I just have my solution to my problem solved. It happens when you're surrounded by stacks and stacks of books. Indian Texts of Mahamudra, Volume 3. Very good. So I just remembered, because I've been Zooming a little bit today, meeting, that we actually finished the 8 Doha treasury that 16th Karma put together that I've been working on, getting instruction on. And so I was then, and I only realized that right when I sat down and I was talking with Eric, I was like, oh, what to work on now? And so there are a couple of options. And one of these actually, one of these is to just kind of check in and see how people's practice is doing. And start a little bit of a conversation, get some, for lack of a better term, nitty gritty things resolved that people might have in their practice questions about Mahamudra is an amazing practice, so deep, so profound, and like an ocean, there are many things that feed it. So it's not just one thing, one river, so to speak, that moves into it. All of these streams come together. So we find, within the context of tantric practice, Mahamudra is touched into. We find Sutra Mahamudra, which is a combination of shamatha and my bad, my sound. Can't see or hear. So okay, is this good? Should be. So, all of these threads come together to help feed what we might call Mahamudra, the sutra form, tantra form, and then what's also known as the essence form. And it's for example, this is like one of, I think, 5 volumes of the Indian sources of Mahamudra, right? So volume after volume after volume. It's one of Carl Brunhol's new, relatively recent translations. So I want to first check in and see what kind of practical questions people might have about this. And then if people have no questions, which isn't bad, then we can, I can just dash out to the other room and get a book and we can keep going. So how are people feeling? And I'm going to call on Sarah. Sarah, what questions do you have about Mahamudra?
Well, I'd love to hear you talk about.
I think you're muted. I'm sorry. Or no, or yeah.
Can you hear me? You can't hear me. You can hear me, Christopher? One out of 5. You can hear me now.
You can hear? I can't hear. That's odd.
Can you hear me, Lama Justin?
Can you
know what?
Lama Justin?
Sorry.
So do I have a voice or am I voiceless?
I hope you have a voice.
I don't know. One never knows.
Yes.
Now it's very quiet on my end.
Oh, you sound perfect to me.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think I mean, I'd love to hear. I think my question is kind of nebulous. It isn't very clear. It's more just, I feel like I'm engaged in a process with Tilopa 6 nails of really just noticing all the ways that that I control, that control patterns of control play out, and so many different circumstances, and both in formal practice, if I'm experiencing some sort of blissful experience and then wanting to maintain that, or looking, then getting caught in a habit of kind of like looking for that again, which can lead to a kind of sanitized or dull experience. And then also just in daily life, just noticing all the ways that I'm, in these patterns of control. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess I would have to kind of sit with it to get clearer about what a question might be in there, but certainly open to any insight or yeah, just around, as those patterns unwind themselves. Sorry, that's all I got, Lama Justin.
No, that's great. and really, it's a great topic. So control is super kind of insidious, so to speak, because we do this all the time. So there are a number of different ways that we can experience control. Sometimes it's really subtle, and it's just kind of relative self-conscious practice, right? Here it is, me sitting, doing something, right? Now sitting in meditation, right? Even that is a little bit of control, right? It's creating, engaging in an action with a particular kind of effect in mind, output in mind, energy in mind. And so really, this might sound weird, but like the thing to do is, or not the best thing, a really helpful aspect of practice is this work of practicing like a simpleton, just being completely relaxed, easeful, almost as if we don't even care, like, about what comes next. And it's hard when we have somatic experiences, especially around blissfulness, for example. You can feel it in your body. You can feel really good. Again, there's nothing wrong with that. But we run into problems with even the desire to kind of keep something going. So the question is like, how to be totally like, I just don't care, right? And again, it's not apathy, but it's just letting, like, being some kind of roly-poly thing that just goes with everything that happens, right? And what is the ultimate container for this, right? That it's not me, it's not you, it's not any one of us. It's not about any one of us. When we're able to rest into awareness, that awareness can hold whatever it is that's coming. Right? And so with Tilopa 6 nails, it's super, I think it's super fascinating. Like these are 6 instructions. And of course we read it linearly, like, let go of the past, right? First thing, and then the fruit, right, is, relax, right? But I think that it's actually much more helpful to kind of have a little bit of a conversational relationship between these instructions, where the relaxation and the ease piece of the last of the 6 nails is blended into all of the others, right? So especially with respect to control, it's hard to control when you're just really resting, right? Resting, not meaning like I'm taking a rest, but resting meaning like sated, right? Or contented, right? Experiencing contentment in the moment. Rest, relax, right? Experiencing ease. In other words, not having any desire to guide any which way, right? So every single thought can come, murderous thoughts can come, right? Lusty thoughts can come, sad thoughts can come, heightened experiences can happen. Complete inflation can happen. Blankness can happen, right? And one of the things that we do is just relax into and then also beyond. But the use of the word beyond is really problematic, because beyond designates some kind of future place or some other thing to go other than here. So just being like a rock. These are not helpful politically correct terms, but being an idiot, being a fool, being stupid, being, a corpse, being a cow, being a brick, being a bridge, being the wind, and just letting go completely. Be a sea cucumber rolling around in the current. Absolutely. Yeah. Just like, yeah, I think the thing is, right, is that it's like Mahamudra is the process of just settling into what is happening exactly in this moment, no matter what. And whatever is happening in this moment, no matter what, is perfectly liberated. And the beauty of that is then everything is able to be experienced with, more or less a kind of like finality, right? Not in the sense that nothing comes after this, but that absolutely everything that we experience is just, it's totally okay, right? Even busyness or frenetic experiences, in the midst of those experiences, when we just stop and rest, right? That's it. That's Bodh Gaya. That's the banks of Varanasi, the Ganga. That's no different from our own home. I think it's worth exploring, obviously, not during a formal meditation session, but, my root teacher supposedly put an instruction in the mail before I returned to India the second time that was supposed to be the last instruction I and my Dharma brother would need, and she was like, if you get this, you don't need to come ever again. And of course, the envelope got lost in the mail. And she was like, well, like, if it got lost, then I'm not going to explain it to you. Like, that was just your karma. But this idea, like, and I definitely feel like I understand what she was getting at then. But this idea of wherever we are is it. Wherever we are is it. There's no other place, you know. And it's been interesting for me, for example, like in this whole, like, you know, Young Yoga Retreat Center business, I was like future plans, working. I find that work incredibly exhausting because it just requires some part of me to be in the future, right? There's like this splitting that's necessary, right? But internally, it's exhausting. It's very, very tiring. The thing is like we tend to be conditioned to split that way. And often we're splitting three ways, like a trishul, like a trident, right? The past, the present, and the future. So past, I will never forget, blah, 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 blah. But I don't have the text in here right now. There's in 8th Karmapa's pointing out the Dharmakaya, you know, he mentions that one of the byproducts of this, you know, Mahamudra practice is that one becomes very forgetful, right? Because one kind of doesn't care, you know, whether it happened last week or yesterday or didn't happen, and it's going to happen in the future, doesn't really matter, you know. So with respect to control, like giving ourselves the benefit of having nothing to do. It's completely useless. It has no application, like professionally, Mahamudra. It has no application. You know, I often meet people who are kind of at the nexus of, you know, spiritual practice and great professional output, you know. And so you know, a lot of times, you know, people will be interested in spiritual practice as a way of optimizing, you know, their output in the business world, for example. And I get that style of thinking. Like it makes sense to me, even though it's not not the way I think, right? Definitely not the way my teachers taught me to approach this. But the truth is, and I was just spending time with people this past week, and I was, you know, they were curious about Dark Retreat. I was like, look, like, you know, I want to support you to work towards Dark Retreat, but, you know, the one thing this is going to make you is so impractical. Like this has nothing to do. Like this, if it does anything, it's going to make you want to quit everything. And again, it's not because we have to do that, but it's then, you know, about recognizing the beauty of non-action, right? Recognizing the beauty of letting go of effort and the beauty of not controlling. And so it's hard for ourselves, but then it also becomes very hard if we have relationships with people, or we're in relationships even, to be going down into this nice, you know, place of practice like Mahamudra, or even, you know, Dzogchen, and we get loose, no control, and our partners or families stay the same. You know, that's hard as well. Another thing to kind of keep an eye out for in practice is striving, right? And striving is, it's not, again, you know, striving is generally, I think, probably ultimately a positive thing that has a lot of problems, right? It's positive in the sense that it demonstrates passion, right? It demonstrates, you know, oh, drive, desire, right? It's kind of almost like, you know, libidinous relationship to Dharma, which is great. It can fuel a lot of really great, you know, powerful practice. But we always need to kind of remember, like, when we're working too hard for something that doesn't need that level of effort, you know. You know, relaxation and ease is a really good antidote to controlling. So when we notice we're controlling, like get up and I know you're in Mirror of Light, and we're gonna like kind of go into this, and it is interesting that the Dzogchen tradition has a lot. They've got some really good techniques for breaking things up, but even just going for a walk or taking like a power nap or taking a shower or anything to just be the master of the situation, but not by controlling, right? Because that's the thing we're trying to avoid by other means. Actually, maybe it should be like by other means necessary than actual practice, right? So getting out of the, because again, too, like our conditioning, our habituation, right? The way we've been trained to think and to be and to see things is, that impacts us too, right? So let's say, well, on an individual level, let's say like we're a person who maybe our parents were like, you got to work hard for everything you do, work hard. It's like this, Protestant work ethic. If you're not working hard, you're not doing much, right? And so you get used to it, right? This kind of runs in the background, right? Maybe this is a little bit of a family culture thing, or even like a community thing. And so you become habituated to this, and then you start to practice Dharma, right? And so this natural, what I think this has served me well on the outside, as it were, the outside world of working hard. We eventually will learn that is, that can be helpful in some Dharma applications, but when it comes to these kinds of practices, it's actually like slightly missing the mark, right? And that even, I'll even argue that like while Milarepa showed Gampopa his like calloused butt as his final instruction, meaning, as an instruction to practice, right? My butt is calloused because I've been sitting on this rock for so long. Right? And one of my teachers, Patung Rinpoche, like he did 40 years of retreat in a cave, like right next to he had this retreat cabin. And I'd heard him say like, 40 years of retreat. And I went into that cave and I saw that the stone where he had sat was worn smooth. I was like, oh God, like that's, that is intense, So there's a difference between abiding and working. Yeah, 40 years from his life. He ended up living into the 90s, quite a long time. And so abiding, we can abide in a cave and wear the stone, really smooth, right? But it doesn't mean we're working hard, right? We can abide in the, in open awareness 10 hours a day. Right? This could easily become a job, right? But it doesn't mean that we're controlling. It doesn't mean that we're guiding things or all of this. So there's like the kind of irritating part of this is we have to be able to figure this out for ourselves, right? Because even here, out of this group of what is this, 12 people, like we're all different, right? And the way we're kind of, like, so for example, like I come from a family structure where my parents were very, very supportive, and my father had absorbed a lot of the like, partially because of, I think, his family being displaced during World War II, like, gotta survive, gotta kind of, work hard for things, gotta, all this stuff. And so even though like his desire to want to be supportive was wonderful, and there was a lot of language about like, be the best, be the best, be the best, be the best. And even that plays into our practice, right? At some point, in practicing just meditation, you kind of hit that wall, like, oh my God, oh my gosh, like I've been doing that, right? And this isn't about, I mean, I love my parents and I wouldn't be anywhere without them, because of how supportive they've been. And we're all products of conditioning, right? So he was a product of conditioning. His father was a product of conditioning, like living through 2 world wars. Like, that's hard, right? It's hard to make it through that without having some kind of intense reaction or its impact, right, on another person or your kids, when you're trying to provide, survive, etc. So anyway, not to make this all about my family, but just to to demonstrate that what we're really working with is, like, when we talk about conditioning or habituation, we are really talking about all of these data sets that we've kind of learned and absorbed, sometimes consciously, but often unconsciously. And then when sitting, especially with Tilopa's 6 nails, and the genius part about it is it's just 6 points. And control is one of them. Right? Don't control. And then we realize, oh my gosh, like, this is a lot harder. But then, is it? Because then if you, like, I don't run, but let's say take a long walk, and then you're tired, you come back, you sit down to practice, and everything is different, right? So this is what I mean by kind of, like, mastering the situation is really understanding how, when I am tight, can I get loose, right? And we don't always have to make being on the cushion the way to do it. In fact, it's probably a little bit more wise to make use of all phenomena, right? Everything around us. Lay down with a good picture book, photo book. So for me, photo book of things from India. Lay there, daydream. Oh gosh, feel inspired. Okay, put it down, sit down and practice, or some other thing. Take a bath. Recognizing that this is not a Tilopa says, like, you can't get oil from squeezing sand, right? And so, like, I think that this is, that instruction has a lot to do with, like, these kind of false ideas about production. Like, you gotta work hard. I'm, gonna crush this sand into oil. But you can't do that, right? You need to be soft, right? You need to be easeful. So there's a part of it that I think is inherently a little counterintuitive. And so being, soft like the wind, or like long grass, just letting it do what it does. Like, let us do it, listen to what we need. Ease into the state, ease out, ease in, ease out, ease in. And it's funny, there was this a little off topic, but it's kind of a detail I'm interested in. Like, there's Glenn Mullen translated these 2 books of translations on Gelug texts on the 6 yogas of Naropa, and so some come from Tsongkhapa and Second Dalai Lama, people like this. And there's one, I think it's by Tsongkhapa, where there's a determination of, like, how long should you hold your breath when you're doing Tumo. And there's this, like, ridiculous exercise where you, like, touch one nostril and then touch the other nostril and touch your knee and then the other knee. And, it's like, if you do all of these things, and you can still hold your breath for that period of time, that's good. Or you could just relax, just relax, right? To not be so concerned about time period. Actually, even in the Karmanintik. So this one specific text by Rangjung Dorje, the third Karmapa, is a Dzogchen text. Very similar, kind of in outline to Mirror of Light. A little different in some places, but then there's, like, do this, and then do this, and then do this, and then do this. And with each of these instructions, it just says, for a little bit, for a little while, until you know to move on. Right? And why I love that is because it means that the practitioner needs to be listening to themselves, right? That there's no, yes, it's important to kind of check in with one's teachers. And like, I've had the opportunity to do that with mine. And that's very helpful in terms of kind of making sure that we don't veer off into, la la land. But to listen to our own practice means we're invested in our own practice. It also means we're understanding the language within ourselves. Right? And the language, so for example, with Mahamudra, the language of resting into ease, the language of being a cloud, or the language of being a river, using all these metaphors, especially Maitreya, gives all these very beautiful metaphors. Right. And I've been reflecting a little bit, like this collection of dohas, like 8 dohas, right? All we need is one. And knowing also when to just kind of chill out, right? Knowing when to relax. This is where appreciating simplicity is really helpful too. Like the simplicity of letting go. When I let go, what is the experience? If the experience is open awareness and of natural stability and ease, then there really isn't anything else you need to do. There aren't really any other practices you need. And we also don't like to hear this because, there's so many practices, right? There's so much stuff. There's this, there's that, there's this, there's that. And the Vajrayana tradition tends to present itself in a hierarchical way, where there's, you have your beginning practices, and your intermediate practices, and your, advanced practices, and then the secret practices. And so we will see these and we will often think, I want to move on to the next thing and the next thing. But the problem with this kind of, hierarchical model is that it makes people think that way. Right? Like it's hard to present something in a hierarchical way and expect people to not follow it. And then you take people like us, this is all we know, right? Is hierarchical presentation. So when we see Vajrayana presented this way, then we're automatically going to want, I want Yagdi, or I want Mahati, or I want Mahamudra, right? Because it's at the top. But like the best thing is to just practice and not care. Practice and not care. I don't know if that was helpful. I know you said you didn't really have a question, so I didn't really have an answer.
That's definitely helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not a big fan of like militaristic practice. This kind of like, you find this in the Tibetan tradition in particular. Like when I was doing Nundro, like Karmakaji Nundro, I started off, I did prostrations in Sikkim, started off Vajrasattva and Bodh Gaya, but that's when Nani Zangmo died. And so then Bokor Rinpoche invited me to come up to his monastery in Mirik. And so I finished Nundro there outside of Darjeeling. And all of his senior lamas, like the Omze, the chant master for the monastery, and the Dorje Lobon for the monastery, and all these, the discipline master for the monastery, are all my age, right? And so they were doing Nundro when I was doing Nundro, and I would eat meals at the monastery every day. I would show up, wait for them to ring, the bell for dinner. It turned into, how many Dorje Sampa did you do today? How many mandala offerings? And it turned into this like, gruff show off thing. Oh, this many. Oh, and that makes you feel good. Oh, I can keep up with, I can keep up with, the Omze. I can keep up with the Doje Loban. But of course, that's just, it's just machismo. Right? That's not real practice. Right? And my root teacher said to me, and I'm glad she said it. It's really scared me. She said, if you get worried about how many you have done on any day of any practice, that day doesn't count. It's like, scratch it. Like, don't count it, And, part of me is like, oh my God, no, especially because I was like, still like coming hot off the, like, people pleasing, work, hard, And so while I was doing prostrations in particular, like the circumstances were so rustic and basic. I mean, it was like so good to go through that. I mean, it was just it was crazy. Like my Dharma brother couldn't actually even finish. Like I finished when I did, he needed some time to recover his health. Like, the last, couple thousand, every time he would prostrate down, he said it was like the floor was made out of rubber and the walls were made out of rubber and we were malnourished and all this stuff. And, I thank God though for that kind of experience because, that's where you begin to understand, like, just one could be perfect, and so, we need to give ourselves permission to let go of expectation. And it's only when we let go of expectation that, like Rigpa fills in the space with all this potential. Eric, I see your hand is high-fiving me.
Yes, and passing along this question.
Oh, yes.
Curious, as I'm finding that I can't tell the difference between Mahamudra and everything else. The only difference I can tell between Mahamudra and everything else is only if I view everything as Mahamudra, but that's it. And that nebulous feeling of, I don't know if that's right, and yet it blows my mind.
Yeah. I mean, this is a good question. Because like, there's the academic answer, which parses out the differences between these things. And then there's the kind of more practical answer in which there really can't be a difference between Mahamudra and everything. I've told this story already before, but I'll repeat it, that my Dharma brother's parents came out to visit when we were in India for a year, and they came to visit us at Bokar Rinpoche's monastery, and we were having this audience of Bokar Rinpoche, and one of his, so he was considered a master of Mahamudra, and then Tara was his main practice, white Tara, but then Kala Chakra, he was a master, he collected and practiced all lineages, Kala Chakra practice. Super incredible practitioner. And so we were sitting in his audience room. There's a big statue of white Tara, like life size. And my friend Eric's mother was like, who's that? To the Tara statue. And Bokar Rinpoche pointed, or he's like, oh, her. And she's like, yeah. And he's like, oh, that's Mahamudra. And then looked at us, he's like, like, you got it, guys? Like, and so like, where the differentiation in this question kind of comes from is like, are we talking about Mahamudra, the practice, or Mahamudra, the experience? And Mahamudra, the experience, is the resting into the nature of mind. It's and not only resting into it, it's inhabiting it, inhabiting this flow that Tilopa so beautifully captures in these 6 nails. So experience free of the past, right? Any kind of anchoring in the past. experience free of any anticipatory experience or wondering or predictive quality about the future. Completely lobotomizing the present, as it were, right? Let go of the present, massage it away, treat it like it's melted butter, just let it go. And again, relinquishing control, not getting into meaning making. It's like another thing that is hard. It's hard in some Dharma spaces because, all we talk about is me. Oh, this makes me feel like blah, 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 and it's fine, but eventually we need to kind of get past that and then resting. And so the experience of Mahamudra is resting into timeless awareness. The practice of Mahamudra is familiarizing ourselves with the fact that that is the root of our mind. And so Mahamudra, like when classically taught, has three kind of main practices. The first is the practice of shamatha, right, or shine in Tibetan, which is calm abiding. It's really focused on training into resting into equanimity. In the beginning, though, it's not experienced that way. It's experienced as, oh my God, my mind is crazy. You sit down and kind of recognize how much one is reeling. But with good experience, time put into the practice, things kind of settle, right? And it becomes actually quite easy to settle into this equanimous state, where even if thought activity comes, it's not accompanied by friction or suffering or attachment or anything like this. Things just kind of come and go, kind of like being a real snooty shop owner, right? And just watching everybody come and go on the street. The second practice is vipassana, or in Tibetan laktung, which is, in this particular case, from this basis of quiescence, then resting in that same way and letting the mind recognize itself. So unlike, the vipassana that a lot of people practice kind of in contemporary mindfulness, where one is labeling, glasses, sound, whatever, light, Justin's voice. You don't label anything, right? You let go completely, and mind becomes aware of itself. And so Laktung actually translates as superior vision or superior insight. So it's a little different actually than what we find in kind of contemporary vipassana. And then the third is to continue to blend these together, right, naturally. And that's hard too. What does it mean to blend quiescence and insight together? And so in the beginning, it's clunky, like, oh, here I am, experiencing quiescence. Now, let me become aware of my own mind. In the beginning, it's a little artificial like that, right? But with time, we rest naturally into this. And so that's technically what Mahamudra, the practice, the meditation is. But when we look at other practices like deity yoga, like Chenrezi or medicine Buddha or other practices, you have all of these components mixed in that are quite similar. The generation of a particular kind of visualization of oneself. Last night I gave a Vajrayogini empowerment. And so, in Vajrayogini practice, for example, you visualize yourself as Vajrayogini and you really get into it. Fingernails, right? What are her fingernails like? Bangles. And she holds a kapala and a trikuk, right? A curved knife. 50 freshly severed heads. She has 3 eyes, and the sow that has 3 eyes, and her hair. She's standing on a corpse that's still warm. In some texts, some commentarial literature, it's oily too. So this is a form of shamatha. right? Really, experiencing that quiescence focuses the mind, settles the mind. But then, since it's a visualization, you can make it as big as space. You can make yourself as Vajrabrahi as small as a mustard seed, and then as large as space itself. Right? And this touches in a bit to the Vipassana side. But then at the end of these kinds of practices, when everything dissolves at the end, right, the completion stage of these kind of outer practices, then you just rest into awareness. Right? And that's the other side of the coin, so to speak. So in one way, most formal practices, you can find Mahamudra in most formal practices. Mahamudra, though, is quite nice because it's also non-conceptual, non-form based. So it has applicability riding a bus, or picking your kids up from school, or caring for a loved one who's sick, or any kind of ordinary experience. Right? Notice the nature of our mind. Right? Notice the qualities of our mind right now. Noticing thought activity. There. Fast, slow. Can I rest into quiescence while walking down the street? Can I let mind become aware of itself while I'm waiting outside of a school? Or driving a car? Or whatever we're doing. So it's kind of a little bit of a both and proposition. Like, yeah, well, I guess we'll hear. Is that person here, or they'll be, no, right? Or they are?
They didn't know if they were going to be able to say, but they're counting on listening to the recording.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so we'll hear in 2 weeks' time whether that answered the question. Richard, your hand was up for a hot second. Do you have anything, Richard?
Yeah, I do actually. I just want to say, first of all, that I really value this sort of conversation that we're having right now. It's really helpful. And I've been asking myself lately, and I think it's because I read this little passage by Sili Natsok Rangrol about cognizance. And the question I ask myself is, why am I doing this? And there's a lot in Vajrayana Buddhism which is quite goal-directed and purposeful. You become a practitioner in order, for example, that you can better meet the needs of other people, more skillfully decide what people need so you can help them, etc., etc., etc. But when I see this conversation which comes up again and again, which is cognizance, awareness, is it? There's nothing more than this. It kind of undercuts all that. And I find myself thinking, well, I'm really trying to understand what happens when I die. Really, I'm really trying to understand what it just means to be, period.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's okay to just be cognizant. But that goes up against an extraordinary sort of barrage of purposefulness that comes in all different sorts of formats, Buddhist ones and samsaric ones as well. But when it comes down to it, it's all about intent. And I guess I've asked this question all through, really, for the last 40 years, initially it was just, what on earth is going on here? I need to understand this better. Thank you, LSD, for opening the door, but now what do I do? And then that's progressed through having children and a job and so forth. And that sense of being more effective as a human being has been a common thread, really. But now I'm finding I don't even care that much about that, really, the effectiveness side of it. And it's just like a new piece of territory, which is this okay to just be aware, and to drift off and come back into being aware, and that's it. And I'm just putting that out there, really, and I'm interested in your response to it, because it's a sort of live question, if you like. Mm-hmm. It doesn't ever get resolved.
Yeah, no, this is a really good question. I think that this came up for me just last year. It's kind of like deep appreciation for keeping the yanas a little separate from one another, right? Especially if you practice things like Mahamudra and Hatha Yoga, because I think that what's important, and I just contradicted myself, because in that empowerment last night, you bring them all together. You bring the Moksha vow, the Mahayana, the Bodhisattva vow, and all the tantric vows together, right? And that is important, right? That's important because that prevents people from spinning off into some kind of nihilistic, non-dual state where I can do whatever I want, kind of thing, right? But I know we're not talking about that, so we're not going to address that. So in all Mahamudra literature and in all Hatha Yoga literature, especially the pith literature, there's this emphasis on not doing work. Right? There's emphasis on real, simple, direct, non-elaborate practice. And there are elements of the Mahayana tradition that involve phenomenal amounts of efforting, and there is, what I think we could say is we can let go. It's okay to let go. At a certain point, I think we just have to have confidence in our practice that I can let go of constantly engaging in an aspirational practice that this will alleviate the suffering of all beings. This will alleviate the suffering of all beings. This will alleviate the suffering of all beings. Especially for people who, I think this taps into this kind of shadow, especially within the context of Bhumisparsha, of wanting to make the world a better place, wanting to, address other people's suffering and needs and all this. And that's good until it becomes a problem. Right? It's good until it becomes this, until you can't just be, because all you're seeing are the problems, or all you're seeing are the places where adjustment appears to be made. I think the thing is, right, is when we just are, truly, right, when we are just being truly, 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 we're not a problem for others. And we are responsibly able to want to address other people's needs as well as our own in a really relaxed and easy way. Right? Instead, what I see is a lot of people really hot and bothered about everything, and believe me, I'm hot and bothered by suffering too, but I think I know enough now to really not get involved in the same way, because practice has shown me to just, when we it's hurry up and slow down, you know, when we're able to relax into our natural state, right? Just being, natural arising compassion arises, natural arising ease, patience, tranquility, but also our abilities, right? And I don't specifically mean cities, but our ability to listen very, very, very deeply, right? For what an appropriate response might be, right? If we, because otherwise, like, I'm going to make a joke at the expense of the Mahayana tradition. We'll just go buy a bunch of fish from a pet store and like let them go in the Hudson River only to like become polluted and die. Right? Like all these like, you know, good activities, right? Like, so our automatic, like, you know, oh, the accumulation of merit, you know, and again, I'm not saying accumulation of merit is not beneficial. Right, but when we're just looking at it from the perspective of accumulation, right? Sometimes a lot of our wisdom flies out the door too, right? And we're just looking at like, let me get as much as I can. Let me produce as much benefit as I can, and it becomes just as shallow and kind of, you know, not well thought out as a lot of our own like self-cherishing activity.
Yeah,
I think the most beautiful thing we can do is modeling pure being. In fact, when I was driving back from upstate on Sunday afternoon, I was driving with somebody, and we were talking about we were talking about people who seem to be interested in spiritual practice just for superpowers, you know, and how weird that is. And I was like, yeah, I think like the best superpower I would ever want to have would be to be like Neem Karoli Baba, who can just be, who just was, right? And somebody would come meet him and they would look eye to eye and the person would be moved by the simplicity of their being and their life would be changed. And they would just go off and do whatever they did next, right? That simple ease, right? Just being, you know, just,
yeah.
I don't know. What does that sound like to you, Richard?
Yeah, it resonates completely. I was just listening to you and thinking there's this sort of compulsion to have an impact of some sort, however small in life, you know. It's very powerful cultural compulsion.
Mm-hmm.
But there's space in all the billions of people to have some people who just rest in the vastness and leave it at that. Hey. Which is kind of what you're saying, really. Just,
I mean, I would argue,
inhabit it, you know.
Yeah, that there's a terraforming quality to it that I think people miss because we are so activity based, right? We're so production based. Even in anti-capitalist circles, everybody is producing anti-capitalism, right? They're trying
Absolutely.
we are trying to equally produce as much anti-capitalism to capitalism so we can knock it out. But then what, right? Then you just have that same kind of anxiety, right? That same kind of fear-based, you know, response, right? Which is kind of all that is. Resting into pure being inherently means we have resolved fear and anxiety and hope. Right? Hope is another like insidious thing.
It really is, yeah.
You know, because hope takes us right out of this moment. You know, I mean, again, all we have is this. This is the irony, like maybe perhaps a little bit about Bhumisparsha too, is that it's named after a mudra of the Buddha touching the earth, right? And this touching the earth is finality. The finality of basic awareness, the finality of resting into awakening, right? It's a bearing witness. It's a request of bearing witness, you know, asking the earth to just witness a simple moment. Right? And the irony about Bhumisparsha too is then it's active, fix, counter, you know, and, you know, something needs to give in order for that kind of open awareness, simple being to happen. And I'll share something. You gotta be careful what I share because I'm writing this book, and if I give things away, then no one's gonna want to read it. But but like in the last dark retreat I did, so like the last 2 days, what came to me was this sense that when we're resting into that open experience of awareness, we are essentially receiving a transmission from the vastness of the universe, that we are no different than it, right? Each one of us is that. And just by resting, we're constellating it. We're making it happen, right? We're constellating it, meaning like it becomes within us, right? Like embodied. And this is kind of this thing we experience, especially with great teachers, where when being in their presence, everything just kind of dissolves. Right? Everything, our problems dissolve, our discursiveness dissolves, our anxieties dissolve. I was telling somebody recently, like with Boka Rinpoche, looking right into his eyes was like looking right at the ocean. Like it was so intense. This like experience of vast peace was just like overwhelming. And often I would I would have this burning question. I lived like right outside of the monastery gate. So I'd like quickly go down to the monastery, find Rinpoche's attendant and be like, oh, can I see Rinpoche? And be like, okay, come. And go in, sit down, and he'd be sitting there and he'd be like basically like, oh, yeah, what? And I'd be like, oh, never mind. Like just in his presence, everything settled, right? Because he was settled into that. And this, I think, is more important than anything in the universe for the world. Like more people like that, right? Where it's just, it's like a person becoming a star or something like this, right? You think you need to travel to another, the center of the universe to go visit a star? Master Mahamudra, and you can be a star on this planet. Right? Yeah, I think that this is like, the good thing about it too is that it counters the again, that really militaristic, macho kind of practice of we need to build, the golden mountain on the hill, kind of golden city on the hill or on the mountain, and just brings us back to spacious ease. Lord knows, right? That's hard enough. And Lord knows when you taste it, you never want to go back, right? And not out of attachment, but out of the experience of that cessation that is just so overwhelming, right? That freedom, that spaciousness, that ease, that timelessness, And I would go so far as to say, if anybody asks, well, yeah, what are you doing for the world? That person needs to be ignored. I think that challenge misses the point, right? That challenge is a challenge of somebody who doesn't understand, right? I don't know how that sounds.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Richard.
Felt like a good conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What other questions people have? Anybody? I'm going to call on Larry. I'm sorry, Larry.
No need to be sorry, Lama Justin. Yeah, just kind of an extension of that. Resting in the way things are, though, doesn't mean that we just have to accept the things the things way are. The things the way they are, right? That in fact, my experience is that those occasional times when I'm able to get to just total radical acceptance, I'm more effective in bringing about change because I'm not so caught up in my own notion of what it ought to look like and how, do I get credit for it or don't I get credit for it? All of that bullshit that, excuse my French, the 8 worldly dharmas, right? That always catch us up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it's not that we give up at everything, but it is also worth pointing out that some may go that route, right? There are many different kinds of ways of manifesting this. I had a really lovely conversation with my dear Dharma sister, Dakila, a couple of years ago now. We were talking about difference between great Dharma teachers and wisdom keepers. Right? And Dharma teachers will transmit Dharma, right? And they hold space for that to happen, right? The flow of Dharma from one person to another. And that can include all sorts of things like, action, right? Direct action is based on the experience of clarity or wisdom that arises from practice, or being engaged in practice, or being engaged in community in practice. So that's good, and that's important. But so are the silent people who just hold, the essence of the wisdom, right? So this is like holding Rigpa or holding Mahamudra, who are just there secretly holding direct access to the natural state. And you find people like this, they're fewer and fewer, harder and harder to find these days, in fact, because these times don't produce people like that, right? This time produces a lot of shoddy people who are really in a rush to become teachers or things like this. And so I'll say that I agree with you. The point isn't to just, rest and let the world burn down, or do whatever it's going to do. And yet there will be some for whom their resting into pure being is needed because it does impact people, in other ways. So it's what I guess what I'm pointing out is that I think that there's a diversity of manifestation of Dharma that is worth ensuring. Because there's beauty in the finality and non-action as well. I think this, though, in an American Dharma milieu, is really hard for some people to digest, right? Because we're active. You don't like it, write letters. You don't like it, get up and protest. You don't like it, da-da-da-da. You don't like it, rest into equanimity. And the whole world rests with you. Right? But there is some wisdom in this, because, I've mentioned this before, I think here, I can't remember, but in last year, 2022, in January, I had some time alone with Dr. Nita in California. And we were talking about Dzogchen, and he was talking to me about Rigpa fields, right? The ways that in which we cause benefit by just resting into Rigpa, right? And this is what I mean about the terraforming quality of these kinds of practices, Dzogchen, Mahamudra, etc., where just being causes a difference in the experience of people around us. Right? And this, I think, is it's hard for people to, I mean, it's not a hard concept for people to get their minds around, but I think it's hard to trust because we have and I'm just gonna say like a lopsided relationship to activity, where it's active, it's like one arm is stronger than the other. The arm that's the arm of activity is very, very strong and is often the first to react, right? And then the arm of just spacious ease tends to get, it's the second to come, right? The second first to invite. And just feeling into these two things, I think, is important. And there are all sorts of, criticisms of what I just said, which I'm totally fine with. Here's like a white man talking about not acting, about changing the world. I can see some people saying that. People are going to say a lot of things, right? We can find reasons for everything to not work. But the one thing like I've noticed in myself is that when I rest into ease, when I rest into natural being, the experience causes an attunement that can't be replicated through aspiration alone. It creates an attunement that has impact, an attunement that causes me actually to want to be quiet more and just rest into this.
Do you think that the if it's possible to sort of disidentify with, in my case, the Richard project, then the compulsion to act or have an impact will correspondingly kind of fade. And I mean, that a lot of this practice is about just that, isn't it? It's about disidentifying with notions of self, and they're kind of tied up with this compulsion to have an impact in the world, to be something, to do something. And
yeah. I mean, I think my feeling about Mahamudra and my feeling about Mahamudra and Dzogchen is that they are very, very passive practices, right? And it's not that they make us passive, but we slow down and there is less of a compulsion to act, right? At least to act like that, settle, experience. And then in that moment, then there is much more capacity to be able to act in a way that is appropriate. Appropriate, perhaps meaning more effective, perhaps meaning less harm is created, less reactive, So the experience of a Rigpa can get so deep that in resting into that awareness, there are ways of impacting things that we don't really understand. And I think this too, like we're very addicted to the physical, the material. And again, I think with respect to deepening in our practice, it's if we want to practice to deepen, we need to begin to shed a predilection towards the material, right? Material change, material impact. you can go deep in this practice and impact things in ways that just, defy concept and defy things. I mean, I've seen people stop the rain in the monsoon season, in Sikkim on 2 different teachers on 2 different occasions, intentionally. Okay, Pating Rinpoche, this, the one who spent all this time on retreat, my root teacher's family wanted to pour a concrete. They're building a building and they needed to pour the concrete roof in the middle of the monsoon, and it was a heavy monsoon. And they asked Pating Rinpoche, they were like, "Oh, Rinpoche, will you stop the rain?" And he was like, "Okay, I'll do it." And he's like, "But just for as long as you guys to pour the concrete and then put, all of the necessary tarps and everything over it." And so I was with him when he did it. He stopped the rain. They came, and, they didn't use trucks there. So they mix the concrete and, buckets, and then bring it and pour the whole, floor. And then right when they put the tarps over, it started to rain again. So, for everybody who needs change, why not have those kinds of abilities? I mean, let us, aim right, aim correctly, right? Aim towards our true potential, right? Rather than, and it's same old story, right? Same old way, same old means. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Gail and Jan.
Yeah. I'm sort of backtracking a bit, but you go to you get invited to a special party. They're 65, and you go there, and there's marijuana, and there's martinis, and there's sugar, and there's all these things, and there's dress up. And I start feeling, this isn't really my place. This isn't really where I want to be, because I don't indulge in any of those things. And so, is it that you don't go to these things anymore? If, I can't practice Mahamudra. Well, I could practice Mahamudra there, but it's getting through the sort of intense anxiety of being a fish out of water. Is it better not to go to these until you can deal with that need to control, Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you reckon?
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, I think I want to be careful about. So what you were describing at first, I was like, "Oh, that sounds like fun." So the other reason why I'm saying that is because I want to be careful and not suggest, or I want to be careful. Yeah, I want to be careful and not suggest that this can be realized in just one kind of setting / location. When we look at the lives of the Mahasiddhas, at least the Indian ones, for example, you find that to some extent and to some degree, depending on the person, there tended to be at some point a confrontation of things that were undesirable or unhelpful or transgressive, specifically to begin to kind of cut into all of the concept that we have about such things, right? So it's not to say the next time you get invited to something like this, you need to, eat a bunch of sugar and drink martinis and, smoke marijuana. But going to a place like that and being uncomfortable is a pretty decent place to do a little bit of private practice, right? And to just look at, like, even the idea of going to a place, and I'm not suggesting that you are worried about like a kind of pollution that happens from going to a place like that, but this is not my place. Okay, and just stay there a little bit and feel into that, need to control, as you named, right? Or the desire for things to be a way different from the way they are in that moment. I mean, this is something that I learned very well being on Rikers Island, more or less for 5.5 years, right? Do I love that place? No. Do I support, its existence? No. Do I love criminal justice? No. Right? Do I enjoy being around violence? No. Do I enjoy being around, paramilitary governance structures? No. Right? And yet, it's amazing to be able to be in these places and then in your free time settle into practice. Because again, like, sometimes control has something to do with intolerance, right? And as Dharma practitioners, it's easy to become intolerant. I'm not tolerant of this. And it's not to say like be tolerant of bias or be tolerant of oppression or be tolerant of all of these things. But again, going back to this basic kind of thing that we've come across in a lot of these texts up until this point, is like, appearance has no distinct qualities / nature. Appearance just is, right? And we can either have a relationship of fear and anxiety to it, or we can have a relationship that affords us the experience of spaciousness. But it's not going to be able to be experienced if we avoid things. I remember talking with Boka Rinpoche about practicing off the cushion, and like practicing on subways, or how busy New York City could be, and he loved that. He kept telling me, he's like, and he's very excited. He's like, that is so much better, at times than being in retreat, because in retreat, when everything is calm and relaxed and controlled and exactly the way you like it, it's easy to not be challenged, right? To get overly comfortable, right? To be overly protected, so to speak. So that then when you find yourself in an experience where you're destabilized, you completely lose you flip your lid, you lose control. Okay. Marijuana is a plant. Sugar is, crystallized, part of a plant that gets processed. Right? Martinis are made of gin or vodka with vermouth, and those are made from plants and water, distilled, etc. In and of themselves, there's nothing harmful about them, right? Or they're not bad in and of themselves. And it's not to say, it can get complicated if people have, problems with substances. But I think the issue is like engaging a little bit of pollution can help our practice a little bit. I'm not saying nobody has to do it, but it can be.
Yeah. Well,
but only do what one can. I mean, this is the thing. It's not. And again, I say that like with a full acknowledgement of wanting to kind of avoid like machismo and that kind of like practice hard, practice like you find this in a lot of Dharma centers, where people are like, I'm so hardcore about my practice. I went and did this and did that. But at some point, like, we have to begin to address the contradictions, right? We can't exist only in pure places, right, at the expense of impure places. You know? And again, to just do it the same way, you know, like, let's say we're going to a doctor, you know, for some kind of medication for a health issue. Like, we don't want to take all the medicine at one time, right? You just take the little bit that's necessary, right? Just follow the prescription, you know. And listen, if it's, you know, if you're like, I don't want that, I don't need that, then fine, don't do it, you know. But there's part of me that wants to push a little bit, like, get a little uncomfortable and settle, you know, see if you can rest into the natural state there. Because I mean, Lord knows when we die, you know, all sorts of things happen, right? And if we're not comfortable, like if we've really kind of buffered ourselves, so it's all nice and like calm and relaxed, I don't have anything to worry about. It's all, you know, these like flowers to smell, you know, and then all of a sudden, like these wrathful Bardo deities arise, and we're not attuned to, you know, an even non-dual understanding that all things that arise are the nature of our mind. All things that arise are essentially pure. Then, you know, it can be, maybe one doesn't want to have that experience.
Jan, did you want a chance to respond? Or Gail, sorry.
Well, I do have substance issues, so
Okay.
you know,
Yeah.
it would destabilize me to drink or to smoke marijuana, so I don't. And I suppose it's that I hear what you're saying, you know, and that I actually went there to practice off my cushion, but you know, it's that I wasn't quite ready. So I, you know, like you say, small doses.
Yeah. It's like homeopathy, right? Little, you know, tiny little.
Yeah. It's, it is, there are fun things, you know. It is fun to see people dressed up, and it's fun, you know. I just can't eat the substances and drink the substances that people are having.
Yeah.
And so my mind is in a completely different, you're in a completely different space. So like you were saying, it's that that thing of just being in the world the way you are, but also accepting the way other people are. Anyway.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, thank you. It's not the same thing, but my wife's birthday was last Friday, and she loves to sing. And so she booked time at a karaoke bar with all of like her friends who love to sing. And I was like, oh, well, you know, if you guys just want to go, you know, just go. And she's like, no, you should be there too. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to sing. You know, so all I did was like sit and watch. It was great. It was great fun. Everybody was incredible. And, but you know, it's, I think I would die if I had to get up on that stage. But I could be there and just really enjoy other people's enjoyment, right? And sometimes that is that's also an important thing too, is if we're not able to connect necessarily to the actual activities, then sometimes just watching other people, you know, in their joy of things that are not the same as ours can be helpful. Yeah. Yay. Well, thank you all. This has been a nice conversation. So I will not be, you know, I'll be at the retreat at Pure Land Farms next week. So I won't be here, but we can pick it up was it right after Memorial Day here in the US? I think that's was it the 29th, I think, or 30th, I think Tuesday is. Yeah, so for now, let's just dedicate the merits so that all beings are able to experience their own mind as spacious, luminous, blissful clarity. May all beings be able to rest into their natural liberated being. And from that space, may all beings arise in whatever way feels appropriate to be able to help alleviate the suffering of all beings in every different kind of way, whatever way feels best. So take very good care of yourselves, everybody. Be well. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.